Okay, in this video, Hermsen teaches you how to divide imaginary numbers. It's not just as simple as taking. What you have to do is get the imaginary number out of the denominator, the bottom. Okay, so you're going to put no I on the bottom. Now these first four I'm going to go over are going to seem kind of easy, but then the game's going to change. Okay. Now you circle your denominator, and there's only one term. Okay, one term. When you only have one term with one term of I mean 7I, it's an imaginary number, it's the only thing you got, okay? You're going to parenthesize the whole fraction, put times I on the outside, okay? Now all you simply do is distribute I to all of these terms. So 5 times I becomes 5I plus 3I times I becomes 3I to the second. Then 7I times I becomes 7I to the second. So we know that I to the second equals -1 every time, okay? So these I to the seconds, not that I there, that's not to the second, so you got to keep the 5I, but then instead of 3I, it's going to be I second, it's plus 3 times -1. And same with the 7 times I to the second, it's 7 times -1. So then you take 3 times -1, and that's going to be -3. Okay, 7 times -1 is -7. Now you can divide because you got rid of the imaginary number on the bottom. Now it's a real number. Okay, so here's how you divide that. You need to take the 5. I'll write it out so you can see it actually. So you end up with 5I plus -3. 3 times -1 is -3, and then -7. Now I divide each of these by -7. So I take 5 divided by -7. I don't like that. I'm fine with decimals, just not something that looks like that. Second PRB. And it would be -5/7 I, okay, because the 5 had the I. Plus, then you divide your -3 by your -7. Second PRB and that would be 3/7 without I, okay. So there's your answer. Okay, we're going to go over 3 more of these. Okay, so again, the denominator just had i's in the bottom, so it's just one term, 3i. 3i is one single term. So then I'd simply distribute an I to all of those. So 8 times I is going to be 8i. -6i to the second times I is going to be -6i times I is -6i to the second. And 3i times I is 3i to the second. So then all the I to the seconds now have a value of -1, okay? So it's going to be -6 times -1, and that's going to be 3 times -1, okay? And that is a -6, so then you find those products, and you have 8i plus 6, because -6 times -1 is 6, 3 times -1 is -3. Now you divide. 8 divided by -3, I don't like that. Hit second PRB, -2 2/3 I. There's your imaginary number. And then 6 divided by -3 is going to be -2. You have to divide both the terms by -3. Okay. Next one, 8 plus 7i divided by 2i. So you have one term. So one term, you're just going to distribute an I to every term in the fraction, okay? So 8 times I is 8i. 7i times I is 7i to the second. And then 2i times I is 2i to the second. Now replace your I seconds with -1. So 8i plus 7 times -1. And then 2 times -1, so you need to multiply those. 7 times -1 is -7, and 2 times -1 is -2. Okay, so I divide both the imaginary number and the real number by -2. Okay, so you got -4i, and -7 divided by -2 is 3.5, okay, or 3.5. I'm fine with decimals, just not those that go on forever. Okay, next one. 6 plus 7i divided by negative 5i. Again, you have one term of I on the bottom. So now you got to distribute I to every term in that. Okay, so 6 times I is 6i. 7i times I is 7i to the second power. Negative 5i times I is negative 5i to the second power. And then we replace our I to the second powers with negative 1. But the I stays. You don't do anything about the I because it's on top, so it's not going to matter. 7 times negative 1. Negative 5 times negative 1. Okay, so 7 times negative 1 is negative 7. Negative 5 times negative 1 is 5. So you divide both the imaginary number by 5, 1.2i, and the real number by 5, negative 1.4. There you go. Okay, now the game's going to change. Okay. We got 3 plus 2i divided by 8 plus 7i. Okay, now you have two terms. You have not only do you have the I, you also have a real number to go with it. Now here's what you can't do. You can't do the distribution of I, because here's what's going to happen if you do that. So if I distributed an I to these, that'd be 3i, 2i to the second, 8i, 7i to the second. So if I put I to the second to negative 1, these two become negative 1s, okay? And I'd multiply those. So it'd be negative 2 and negative 7. So 3i plus negative 2, 8i plus negative 7. That accomplishes absolutely nothing because I still have I on the bottom, okay, with that 8. It's like the only thing that accomplishes is that the real and the imaginary got switched, okay? You have to apply what's known as the conjugate rule. Conjugate. So when you have a conjugate, you're going to multiply by another fraction. Look at the bottom. It's all based off the bottom. The real number 8 stays the same, but the I number we switch to negative 7i. Now you're like, well, what do we put above it? The same thing on bottom that I have on top. When I'm multiplying by a fraction, I have to multiply I have to match the top and bottom on the fraction. I have to match because I need to multiply by a fraction that's equal to 1. So whatever I end up putting here, I just copy to the top. And then you have to do your FOIL, but you have to do it twice. Okay, I know it sounds crappy, but okay. So on top, you take 3 times 8, and then 3 times negative 7i. Then you take 2i times 8. And then 2i times negative 7i. So that's 24, negative 21i, positive 16i. Now 24 is simplified, so are the i's, but this one here is going to be negative 14i to the second. Well, don't leave that because I to the second has a tangible value of negative 1. Okay, so this equals negative 14 times negative 1, and that's 14. Okay. So, with these i's, we go blank plus blank I or blank I plus blank, doesn't matter. So the real numbers, we add 24 and 14, that's 38. Then the imaginary numbers, we add the negative 21 and the 16, and that would be negative 5. So that's going to be your top, 38 plus negative 5i. If you want to write minus, that's fine too. Now the bottom, remember we want to get rid of the I, and this is going to happen, so you distribute 8 times 8, 8 times negative 7i, 7i times 8, then 7i times negative 7i. So 64, negative 56i, positive 56i, and these are simplified, but this last one, negative 49i to the second, don't leave that because I second holds a tangible value of negative 1. So this is negative 49 times negative 1. That's positive 49, okay? Now if I line up my spaces, the real numbers 64 and 49 add up to 113. But the i's, those add to 0, so you take it out. And now you have 113. Now you do the same thing. You divide the 38 by 113, second PRB. 38 over 113, okay. Then you divide the negative 5 by the 113, second PRB that. Okay, so negative 5, remember the I would go on the second one, okay? So negative 5, 1/13 I, okay? Okay, next problem. Negative 2I divided by 1 plus I. Remember, 1 plus I means 1 plus 1I. You'd slip a 1 in there. So then you can clearly see that that is two terms, okay? One's a real number, one's an imaginary. You have to use the conjugate rule. Okay, so I multiply by a fraction. You keep the real number the same. It's the imaginary number you switch the sign. So whatever we're multiplying on bottom, we have to multiply on top as well. Okay, this should match this. Okay, FOIL. Now the top isn't really a FOIL. Okay, we just take negative 2I times 1 and then negative 2I times negative 1I. So it's going to be negative 2I, that's simplified, but this is positive 2I to the second. That's not simplified because that's 2 times negative 1, which is negative 2, okay? I don't care if you go blank plus blank I or blank I plus blank, doesn't really matter. So negative 2 and then negative 2I. There's your numerator. Now in the denominator, we take 1 times 1. You take 1 times negative 1I, positive 1I times 1, and then positive 1I times negative 1I. Okay, so 1 times 1 is 1, 1 times negative 1I is negative 1I, and then positive 1I, and then negative 1I to the second. These three are simplified. This one is not. You can rewrite that as negative 1 times negative 1, which is 1. Okay? So 1 plus 1 is going to be 2. And then negative 1 plus 1 cancels, so it's just 2, which is the point. So you divide both the real and the imaginary number by 2. So negative 2 divided by 2 is negative 1. Negative 2 divided by 2 is negative 1I, okay? Okay, 2 plus 3I divided by 1 minus 4I, or a 1 and a negative 4I. So again, that's two terms. You apply the conjugate rule, okay? So you keep the real number stays the same, the I is the one you switch, okay? And then we copy the same thing up here. Now we have to do our FOIL. So 2 times 1, 2 times 4I, 3I times 1, and then 3I times 4I. So that's 2, 8I, 3I, and these are simplified. And then 12I to the second, but then I to the second holds that value of negative 1, okay? So it's 12 times negative 1, which is negative 12. Don't ever leave an I second not simplified. So the constants would be the 2 and the negative 12. Those are your real numbers, I should say. And that's negative 10. Then your imaginary numbers, 8 and 3 is 11, okay? So on top, negative 10 plus 11I. Now on the bottom, 1 times 1, 1 times 4I, negative 4I times 1, and then negative 4I times positive 4I. So 1 simplified, 4I simplified, negative 4I simplified, and then that's negative 16I to the second, which is really negative 16 times negative 1, and that's 16. Okay? So in the denominator, we're going to have 1 and 16 to make 17, and these two cancel. Okay? Now divide both of those by 17. So negative 10 divided by 17. Nope, second PRB that. Negative 10/17. 11I divided by 17. You divide the 11 by 17. Second PRB. So it's going to be 11/17 I. Okay. Now, again, two terms. There's an I down there, but there's a real number with it. Okay. Remember, on the assignment, the first couple problems, you're only going to have just the one term with the I, so that's when you just distribute the I to everything, and you're good. You don't have to do all this crap over here, okay? When I have two terms, one being a real number, one being an imaginary number, we have to use the conjugate rule. Now, we're going to speed this up ever so slightly here. Keep the real number the same. The imaginary number goes to negative 4I. Then I just copy the same thing on top. Now, on top, I have to do the full FOIL, okay? 5 times 3, 5 times negative 4I, negative 2I times 3, and then negative 2I times negative 4I. 15, negative 12I, negative 6I, and 8I to the second. But again, these three are simplified, but that last one is 8 times negative 1, which is negative 8. Now it's a real number. So the constants, 15 plus negative 8 is 7. Okay. The negative 12, negative 6 is negative 18I. So 7 plus negative 18I. Oh, I'm writing like an idiot. Now, in the conjugate thing down at the bottom, you notice how these middle two cancel? So really, you just have to take 3 times 3 and 4I times negative 4I. So you don't have to do the full FOIL because you know with the conjugates, okay, these down here, it's just going to cancel. If you want to do the full FOIL, you can, but with a conjugate, you really just have to multiply the 3 and the 3 and here and here. See, this times this and this times this always end up canceling. So that's 9 and negative 16I to the second. Now that's negative 16 times negative 1, and that's 16. So then I just add the 9 and the 16, it takes me to 25. I know the i's are going to cancel. So as you can see, you can skip those two inner products. So 7 divided by 25, second PRB, just 7/25. Negative 18 divided by 25, this will have the I on it, whatever it is. You can write that, that's fine. If you want a second PRB it, you can every time. I don't care. So you can write that, or you can just write negative 18/25. Either way is good.